Journalists James Wright Foley and Stephen Joel Sotloff and humanitarian aid workers Peter Edward Kasich and Kayla Jean Mueller were 4 innocent individuals who were killed in captivity under the terrorist group ISIS. Following the wake of their tragic deaths during what was a time of increased kidnappings of Americans overseas, then President Obama called for a comprehensive review of U.S. hostage policy. The review resulted in the 2015 release of a new Presidential Policy Directive, or PPD 30, which updated previous policy directives to reflect the evolution of the threat environment. President Obama also approved a new executive order detailing organizational changes to ensure the government is organized to respond to hostage takings.
So the bottom line is this. When it comes to how our government works to recover Americans held hostage and how we work with their families, we are changing how we do business.
These changes include the establishment of the Hostage Enterprise, which is made up of the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, the Hostage Response Group, an intelligence community issue manager for hostage affairs, the appointment of a special presidential envoy for hostage affairs, and the formation of a family engagement coordinator. Families have the most at stake in the U.S. government's response to their loved ones' kidnapping. And as victims of a federal crime, hostages and their families have rights under the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Yet the hostage review team found that the way the government communicated with families of hostages was often ad hoc and uncoordinated among agencies. In fact, of the 24 key findings and recommendations of the hostage review team, half of them called for improvements to the interactions between the U.S. government and hostage families. One of the recurrent themes gleaned from interviews with families during the review was this.
At the end of the day, whether a hostage is recovered or not, is killed or you never find out what happened to him, the family members of that hostage need to believe that they have done everything they could to get them back and that their government has done everything that they could. Even if at the end of the day it's not successful, they just need to know, and that needs to be, to some degree, a transparent process.
That was Catherine Turman, an undisputed champion of victims' rights who, before her retirement in June, dedicated her 30-year government career to ensure victims' rights are upheld. Turman was at the forefront of the establishment of the FBI's Victim Services Division, which has a victim-centered approach to helping victims of the crimes it investigates. Turman was also instrumental in the development of the Family Engagement Coordinator, right down to writing the position description and the subsequent hiring of the first person to hold it. The role of the Family Engagement Coordinator is to provide consistent, coordinated support and information to families of hostages as part of a dedicated family engagement team, which includes representatives from the FBI's Victim Services Division and the State Department's Bureau of Consular Affairs. The Family Engagement Team was designed to encircle hostage families with support. The team does the same for hostages if they are fortunate enough to return home. Throughout her career, Turman worked closely with victims and their families.
For people who have a missing loved one, it's just that constant uncertainty and stress of waking up every morning and wondering what they're doing or how they're doing and who has them and what's happening to them, and going to bed at night knowing my child isn't in their bed, my husband isn't here, I don't know where he is, I don't know what's happening to him. For the families, it's just that horrible, horrible uncertainty.
Turman came to know Diane Foley and other hostage families.
For a parent, not being able to look after your child, to protect them, to be there when they cry out for you and you know somebody's doing horrible, painful things to them. And I think conversely, even for an adult, a mother like a Diane Foley or the Kasichs, your children are always your children. It doesn't matter how old they get.
The concept of integrating the families of hostages and hostages themselves into the government's handling of hostage cases is known as the new paradigm.
Within families, people are different. Some want to know everything, and some people don't. So one of the things that came out of the family engagement process, that part of the review, was the importance of developing a communication plan with families. In the manual that we wrote, it's a resource guide for families of hostage victims, and in the back is a template for a communication plan. The goal is for the family engagement team to sit down with the family at some point soon after they know there's been a hostage taking and say, how do you want to be informed? Who's the primary person in your family you want us to contact? How do you like to be contacted? Phone, text, email. When do you want to be contacted? Do you want to know everything every time we hear anything, or would you rather know just the significant information? And then how often, how frequently do you want to be contacted? Even if we don't know something new, do you still want us to reach out to you every week or every 2 weeks and check in? That gives families some power, a little bit of control, and some assurance that they are going to know what to expect from their family engagement team.
The Family Engagement Coordinator has a permanent senior position within the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell and the Hostage Response Group, two other interagency bodies created as a result of the review. The Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell is made up of a director from the FBI and two deputy directors from the Department of State and the Department of Defense. It's located at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. FBI Special Agent Rob Saley was the Fusion Cell's second director from March of 2017 until his retirement from the FBI in November of 2018.
The director was responsible to the President of the United States for coordination of all efforts to recover U.S. citizens held abroad, and then also to coordinate efforts to support their families, as well as coordinate the dissemination of intelligence and information between various U.S. government agencies involved in hostage recovery.
As director of the Fusion Cell, Saley not only worked closely with the Family Engagement Coordinator, he did so with the Hostage Response Group, or HRG. The purpose of the HRG includes ensuring the oversight and accountability to the President for U.S. government hostage recovery policies, strategies, and procedures. The director of the HRG is the President's senior advisor on counterterrorism from the National Security Council. Chris Costa, who had worked on hostage matters as a former intelligence officer, served as the HRG director.
We had to work so closely on hostage issues between the State Department, the Office of the SPIHA, the Hostage Fusion Cell, the intelligence community, and the White House. It couldn't have worked unless we were all coherently working together, and there were frictions.
One of those frictions, the position of the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, or SPIHA, wasn't filled for about a year when the Trump administration came into power. The SPIHA is appointed by the president to engage diplomatically with leadership from foreign governments in support of U.S. hostage policy. Both Costa and Saley, whose service overlapped during this time, objectively agree it did cause a bit of dysfunction.
We didn't have somebody in that status to go and do the things that we needed to have a SPIHA do. But there was also a change in how the Obama administration did business, which was very process-driven. Some people would say it was almost too process-driven in that they would take too long to make decisions, to a administration where there was not very much process at all in terms of decision making and doing things.
Despite some dysfunction, there were successful hostage recoveries. The Trump administration reaffirmed the policy put into place at the end of the Obama administration.
I would reject any idea that the administration isn't serious about hostages, and this is why. As soon as I entered the fray and engaging with the Homeland Security Advisor, I realized on day one how crucial it was that we work counterterrorism policy issues and always aggressively focused on recovery of the hostages. It took me about a week or so to evaluate Presidential Policy Directive 30 and begin to fully appreciate the emotion, the difficulty, the failures of the past. And I don't mind saying that the integrity, the passion, and the ability to do a course correction and an acknowledgement of failures in the Obama administration on hostage matters, that became the basis for building Presidential Policy Directive 30. And it was a sound policy. I assessed that in the early weeks of the administration, and we validated it informally We weren't going to address it like other policies and begin to change them. What I wanted to do is execute off of that. The administration did. We were resoundingly credited for being aggressive on recovering hostages.
Like the case of Pennsylvania native Caitlin Coleman, her former husband Joshua Boyle of Canada, and 3 of their 4 children who were born in captivity in Afghanistan.
I can tell you on the Coleman case, for example, everyone in the Trump White House that had any responsibility was fully engaged on the issue. And I had the access to the right decision makers. There was a great deal of interest in pressing on the recovery for the Colemans. It was, in a sense, personal for all of us. We recognized she was in a tough situation. The kids were at risk. We wanted to bring them home.
And they did. In 2017, 5 years after the Taliban-linked Haqqani network seized the couple, they and their children were rescued.
I think the theme that I wanted to impart is both administrations get credit. The latter part of the Obama administration for righting what was wrong about our policies and solidifying it. And then secondly, the execution followed by the Trump administration's work on hostages.
Julia Neshawat was part of the hostage enterprise from the beginning, back in 2015. She experienced the evolution first as deputy envoy and then as acting special presidential envoy for hostage affairs during the time period when the position was unfilled. Neshawat says, as with any new entity, there were growing pains, but ultimately the enterprise strengthened and became more effective as it matured.
With the transition in the new administration, the mission still continued, the roles are still there. There really hasn't been any change. Efforts have been ramped up, more resources were added here or there, more engagements. It's becoming more routine in the sense of not just something that was ad hoc.
In a 2019 FBI public service announcement, the current director of the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, Kieran Ramsey, commented on the progress the government had made in its strategic response to international kidnappings and its involvement of families in decision-making.
Have our efforts improved greatly in rescuing and recovering Americans? Absolutely they have. And have our efforts improved greatly in engaging, supporting, and collaborating with families of the victims? Absolutely they have.
Diane Foley agrees, saying the PPD 30 and executive order holds the government accountable, but she and the other hostage families assert that that's just not enough.
The Presidential Policy Directive 30 is limited to hostage cases, meaning people like our son Jim who were taken by a terrorist group or criminals or pirates. But it does leave out a larger group of wrongful or unjust detainees, citizens who are arbitrarily arrested by other governments for political reasons or even accidentally.
On the next episode of An American Mission, mapping the way to making hostage policy a top priority, where families and other stakeholders assert the PPD 30 and executive order falls short.
It's imperfect, like any policy. So I think we shouldn't ever rest on our laurels.
What the government can and cannot do, and how the public can help fill the gaps.
I firmly believe there's a role for NGOs. There are things they can do, like say that the government can't do.
The fight against terrorism.
They're very good at their trade craft, and it's just tyranny of time and distance and experience of the bad guys makes it really hard. And if you don't have an understanding of that, it's real easy for people to just say, oh, why don't we just throw more surveillance aircraft at the problem and do this or do that? It's not that simple.
I'm Mollie Halpern. Thanks for listening.